Hey everyone. As it is currently Thanksgiving, I wanted to go into my patrons and say thank you once again to everyone who's been supporting me. Since the last time I've had a chance to sit down and talk to the patrons was really right when Patrick left the podcast. So I want to really do a huge shout out to everybody who's continued to stick with me and this transition. Huge thank you to everybody who is supporting me. I've lost my job during this pandemic. I have not been able to work in the restaurant industry, which is what I was doing here in Portland. And so your support is kept me in my house. And I don't know how else to say that. I am currently paying my rent with Patreon from you guys. And so I just want to say a huge shout out to everybody who's really let me achieve the dream and do this full time, because I am now a full-time podcaster, which is something I didn't expect to happen quite so soon, but between the pandemic and now doing this by myself, it's sort of become my full-time job. That being said, there's been a lot of adjustments, and I wanted to let you guys know that Aradia is going to be jumping in a more official capacity. A good chunk of the money that you are contributing is going towards her. And so I've been able to actually kick some money her way for some of the background stuff and some of the guest appearances she's been doing. So I've been super happy with that and super proud. I hope we can continue to make a podcast that you enjoy and find entertaining. And I was very worried when Patrick left that the podcast would not be able to continue, but that has clearly not been the case. People have stepped up and done wonderful guest appearances. Everyone's continued to listen. Everyone continues to support me. So thank you so much. So I'm going to go ahead and read those names of the people who have been helping me out. And this is starting on August 1st. So we're in August, September, October, and some of November. So once again, about 3 months worth. So Scott McClary upped your pledge on August 1st. Crystal Cranfield pledged. Thank you. Garrett Dixon pledged. Bo Lowenstern. Mac Turbo. Jessica Herzog. Aaron Cliff, Michael Rasmussen, Cody Kilbrew. Fate, as once again, I want to say thank you. He's done he's contributed a huge amount over the course of this podcast, and continues to do so. So huge shout out to Fate. Chris and Lauren, Helen Astley, Rain Case, Alex London, thank you. Thanks for the nice email. Neil Williams, thank you so much, Neil. For increasing your pledge. That was a huge amount. Really, really appreciate that. Simon Donnelly, and that takes us through August. Then going to September, Daniel Carlson, Becky Hartman, Stefan Kelly, or Stephen Kelly, your choice, Rodney Montgomery, Eon Cleary, Gemma K, Elaine Daraguma, thank you so much, Jackson Gross, Travis Bunch, Rachel, Benjamin Postulart, Andy Gall, Christine Cox, Rima Babima, love it, Cryptic Wit, Dana Luhu, Fendarin44, thank you, Fendarin. So, and Fendarin takes us through September. Moving to October, Caitlin Mara, Jitka Branjeska, I hope I didn't butcher that too much, Josh.hr, Khalees Marvis, Kyle Sternard, Seth London again, upped his pledge, thank you, Seth. Howell Brandenburg, Niles Mule, Ken Paterka, again, thank you, Ken. He's been a long-time supporter. James Mariscal. And I want to do a huge shout-out to Annalise Amaro. I've seen all the work you've been doing in the hospitals. Keep it up. Fantastic work. Thank you so much. Nicholas Capasso, Evan Mack Meidelby. And then moving on to November, Rand's Left Hand, great name. Peter Van Velzen, Derek Officer, Jeffrey Petrie, Natalie, Chuck Martin, Geek2 Studios, thank you so much, Justin, and David Green. So hopefully, if you haven't heard your name yet, let me know. Everybody, thank you so much. And if you haven't been able to support, or if you've had to stop pledging, I completely understand. I in no way am ever angry if someone has to stop their pledge. Life happens. I appreciate everyone who's contributed any money to the Patreon. It's been a huge difference in my life and is really why this podcast continues to go. So thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Enjoy the podcast.
This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast.
And today I am joined by Bambi, who guested on episode 184 and 185, where we went through Rand's visions in the Crystal Column Terangrial in Rodian, and she also played Egwene and SpoilerCon skit. So, super happy to have her with me for this episode. Speaking of talking to ourselves, tonight we are going to get into Rand, hopefully. Talking to himself.
Yeah. Nice segue. Love it.
Well, thank you. But first, do you want to do chapter 27?
Yes. Yeah. Let's do it.
Which is gifts. And the symbol is the dragon banner. And this is from Egwene's point of view. This whole chapter.
It is. Yeah, I'm just flicking to it in my book. 546. I have a paperback in front of me. Going old school. Yeah, nice. Dragon banner.
Ogier brings up that you did a wonderful job playing the persona of Egwene in the SpoilerCon Varanon trial.
Yeah, and just at the outset, so I read through the chapter and obviously took notes as I was going along, but I kind of had some overall observations. And so I really feel like this is speaking of Egwene, all the elements of her development kind of coming together, because we kind of see the Aiel honor system, her general badassery, and this funny, what I kind of thought was a juxtaposing attitude towards Gawyn and his white knight stereotype, how that is different to her general attitude towards dudes and men and Rand in the you know what I mean,
yeah, totally. And I actually see these two chapters, this chapter and the next one, working really well together in that way, as it shows they are both sort of become Aiel in a way. Both Rand and Egwene have
Rand struggles with we'll get to that, but
he does. But Egwene certainly more than Rand has become Aiel and internalized the lessons that she has taken from the wise ones.
I am nodding at that. And yeah, because I kind of thought she's in this chapter in Gifts, she has two layers of identity kind of going on. So we kind of see the wise one / miscellaneous Aiel costume in the city sort of overlaying being an Aes Sedai, and they're both not really her at this point. And she kind of overtly uses them as a costume sort of thing. But as you say, at the same time, we're seeing her internalize the lessons, I suppose, the persona of both, even though they're not quite who she actually is at this point. At least that's the way I was kind of reading it.
Sure. Both the Aiel image of her and the Aes Sedai version of her?
That's right.
Saying? Yeah.
That's right, yeah. Because she's not that far away from Saladar at this point, which we'll no doubt get to. But
no. As we said, she pretty much says in 7 days she's going to have that meeting, and that's the one where she gets summoned.
Yeah, exactly. The last couple of read-throughs have been listen-throughs, and so they're kind of different. So I was reading through this, and it was the first time that I noticed how close it is. So that was one of the things that I highlighted, 7 days away. It feels so close. It's happened so soon now. But,
basically, she has not been in training from the Wise Ones this entire book. After Lanfear attacked, she's had the headaches, and she has not been back in the World of Dreams officially. And the first time she's officially back in the World of Dreams, she gets summoned to Tar Valon.
That's right.
So it's literally there's no training that occurs in this book.
Yeah, no formal
they just have
training
her on the bench.
Yeah, right, it's just her kind of doing what she does best and saying, I'll take that. I'll take that advice to not do this. I'll take that on notice and do it anyway. And she got something out of it, as we'll get into now. It's my theory, and I think that maybe you guys spoke about this recently with her and Gawyn. I'm team that happened because of the dream. But if you've already covered that, I don't want to cover.
We've talked about it quite a bit.
But,
yeah, I mean,
yeah.
But you believe that the dream affected her significantly.
I do, yeah, because there's the whole thing that's explained by one of the Aiel dreamers that it kind of works both ways. If you've got strong attraction from one person in the dreamscape star, stars in the sky, dreamscape that she ends up in, if someone can pull you in, or if you have a passing attraction to them, it can kind of go both ways, like a magnet sort of thing. And so I always kind of thought that he was just so strong on Gawyn's side that sucked her in, and then that influenced her emotional reaction to him thereafter. I mean, there might have been. I mean, he's clearly an attractive dude, so.
Do you think it's a compulsion level, or do you think it's more like your friend telling you that that attractive dude likes you, and therefore that gets your attention, and you end up liking him in return?
Honestly, something in the middle. I think it's like I wouldn't call it capital C compulsion, but I think it's some sort of effect of Teller and Riyadh that's like stronger than just the attractiveness that comes when you know someone else likes you. But in any case, they end up together. So I do think that the dream, that scene where she ends up in his dream for the first time, did sort of, you could say, maybe change her brain psychology or brain chemistry somehow to kind of like force that connection, that neural pathway or something like that to, see him differently.
Like left an imprint of the dream Egwene on the real Egwene.
Yeah, exactly.
Even if it's shallow imprint, it lets her emotions sort of fill it, and they become real.
Yeah, and then obviously, like, there's that, like, connection where she enters it for the first time, and then, they are together in the dream as well, and that, that would leave an imprint by itself. You can kind of, like, get into whether that was really real. I think you and Arady did talk about this, actually, and, what that means for them when they step out of the dream, but it's still a memory. There's that scene where she wakes up and she's like embarrassed and flustered in the mirror, and it's kind of cute, but
she is blushing constantly.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of cute.
It is cute.
Yeah. And so, did you want to do a read-in to this, or?
Yeah, I didn't want to read the very beginning as she's running. I wanted to read the flashback, so I'm just going to read the italicized part.
Do it.
Threading through the crowd, she peered about, looking for Gawyn, and trying with some difficulty to pretend casualness. She did not want him to think her eager, after all. Suddenly, a man leaned towards her, whispering fiercely, "Follow me to the Long Man." She jumped. She could not help herself. It took her a moment to recognize Gawyn. He wore a plain brown coat, and a thin dust cloak hung down his back, the hood up and nearly hiding his face. He was not the only one cloaked. Any but Aiel who went beyond the city walls wore one, but not many had their hoods raised in that oven heat. She caught his sleeve firmly as he tried to slide away ahead of her. "What makes you think I'll just go off to an inn with you, Gawyn Trakand?" she demanded, eyes narrowing. She did keep her voice down, though. No need to attract eyes to an argument. "We were going to walk. You are taking entirely too much for granted. If you think for a moment..." Grimacing, he whispered at her hurriedly, "The women I came with are looking for someone. Someone like you. They say little in front of me, but I've caught a word here and there. Now follow me." Without a backward glance, he strode off down the street, leaving her to follow with a lurching stomach.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the flashback where he basically I like that he's like, "Come with me to an inn." And she's like, "I'm not going to an inn with you, young, like, presumptuous." And he's like, No. We need to talk.
I mean, I understand why she'd say that. And this is immature, but I thought, like, Robert Jordan, the Long Man, really?
I was going to say something about that. Yeah, really? Is he compensating for something? Is that the...
Yeah, it's just like, if the sort of sense of the scene wasn't obvious enough, like, let's just name the inn that. And...
he's very tall. What can you say?
He's tall. Sure, I mean...
Yeah.
Yes, let's go with that interpretation.
That's what the Long Man refers to.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, I just see this whole thing as it plays out, like this, like, typical, it's like a rose-colored glasses feelings from her, like, you have that side of the relationship, you got oxytocin running through your brain, and she just kind of, like, lets him, do his thing and be his white knight, like I was sort of alluding to before, and she kind of, like, is...
I think it's more, he says, like, she's not okay with it until he says... the Aes Sedai are looking for you.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, that's true.
Yeah, and then she's like, "Oh, shit." Like, cover blown, basically. And so then she follows him. So I've had that feeling when someone's like, "We need to talk," and your stomach just drops out.
Right. Yeah.
That's sort of what I see here.
Because then she thinks a little bit more about what happened, right, after she goes with him.
This is one of my favorite lines. She should have been angry at him, thinking he knew what was best for her better than she did. But for some reason, it made her want to smile indulgently even now. And that's that rose-colored glasses you were talking about.
Yes, that's what I was getting at. Yeah, exactly. It's that, like, with any other character, really, you kind of get, like, an almost like naive-ish reaction as it's like, excuse me? Like, you think you know better for me than I do? No, thank you. But yeah, with him, she's like, oh, well, you know, I think that's why it's sort of like that white knight sort of thing. You know, she's like, oh, that's kind of nice that, you know, he wants to look after me. I'm like, who are you, Egwene? Stop it. Be your own woman. But yeah.
And that's why I really love the quote you did in the video, which is, you know, why can't you let the rest of us be heroes too?
Oh, man. That is like the linchpin line for me for the whole series.
Right. I
think about that so much.
And that very much is sort of like what she needs to tell Gawyn.
Absolutely. Exactly. Just, yeah. But I mean, yeah, it's probably the thing that pisses off people the most about him as a character is like, and we see it a lot more later on when they're bonded. Mm-hmm. He just doesn't trust her judgments and decisions on stuff and thinks he knows better for some reason. It's certainly what pisses me off the most about him and their relationship.
Yeah.
And she just puts up with it.
I'm realizing more and more I have a lot of things to say about how Sanderson, not that he took characteristics that weren't already there, but that he took minor character flaws and made them major character sort of points. You know, like Gawyn's major flaw became one of his minor flaws became his major character arc. Same thing with Matt. Same thing with Like I feel like he loves exploring what makes a character bad and sometimes or what makes a character like not bad but flawed. He loves looking at character flaws, and I think maybe he went a little too deep into Gawyn's flaws.
Yeah,
it just based on the reaction of the fan base.
Yeah, it does make me think though, like that set him up for the blood knife situation.
I don't get the blood knife situation. Why did he put those fucking rings on? I still don't understand.
Yeah, it ended up saving her though.
Yeah. I never understood his motivation. Why did he? What made him decide that he was the one who was going to put the? Never made sense to me.
Because he's a white knight. He rides it and saves the day by sacrificing himself because that's what dudes do from Andor, apparently.
All right. Compare and contrast Matt as a white knight versus Gawyn as a white knight. Because Matt kind of rides in and saves the day successfully, but he doesn't, like, try to do that.
Nah, exactly. He's just kind of, like, would accidentally, like, roll out of bed into the, like, white cloak sort of thing and, like, you know, stumble into the situation and be like, oh, I know you. I feel an obligation to help you, so I feel like it's the right thing to do, so I guess I'm helping you now, damn you. That would be how he did it, something like that. Whereas Gawyn's just like thinking it and overthinking and planning and being like, oh, how can I like be the dude who like is the savior? Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's an interesting comparison to make for sure. But for me, Matt would do it by accident, like you say, and end up being loved by the fan base as a result of his nonchalance instead of his just overinvestment in that part of his personality, which I think is what Gawyn does and gets hung up on. Yeah, things to say about that for sure.
I like that, Matt, that it will be all right night.
Yeah. She'll be right. No. Instead of a, I know.
She'll be right night.
She'll be right night.
Oh, she'll be right. God, I just found a YouTube channel called How to Dad.
Okay.
Which is, and he's an Australian, I believe he's in Sydney. And he just makes funny videos about, like, how to be a dad.
That sounds amazing.
And there's always one, like, the end of his videos, it's always like, how to dad. One of them is always like, she'll be right, and just walks away.
That is very Australian.
It's very Australian.
I love it.
So when you said that, I, like, just watched that today, and it blew up in my head. No, he's New Zealand. I'm so sorry.
Look, I mean, New Zealand to Australia is like Canada to America. The people are generally nicer, and it's more cold. And other stuff too, but like...
And other stuff too, yeah, no. If you're stereotyping.
if you're stereotyping. But it's funny because you remind me, there's this famous children's presenter in Australia called Noni. She was on, I don't know if you guys ever got Play School with You. It's a very Australian kids thing.
Mm-mm.
And she was on it for like 30 years. Then I don't know if she wrote this book or whether she co-wrote it or something. It's like an illustrated book seemingly about kids and like going to sleep at night, same sort of thing. But it's called Go the Fuck to Sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and she does a reading of it.
I read that.
Right. Yeah. And it's such a weird thing because she's like this like motherly, like gentle character sort of thing in her persona, and she's reading this book like, and it's like, I can't remember what it says, but it's like a rhyming thing, and every line at the end is like, and go the fuck to sleep. And I'm just like, man, I don't have children, but I know a few people who I'm going to buy that book for when the kids are the right age, because that sounds amazing.
I think Samuel L. Jackson did a reading of that as well.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It's so good.
I do not fucking grant you
Yeah.
a seat on the council.
Get the fuck out of here, dude. Yeah. Fucking midichlorians, really?
Oh, God.
That's a whole other topic. Whole other podcast, actually.
That is a whole other podcast. But I will say, I've been arguing with some younger roommates that I have.
Okay.
Who love the prequels. Because they were out when they were kids. And so...
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to that. But
I can kind of understand, but I had when the sequels came out and he was ranting about how awful they are, I was finally like, see, this is how I feel about the prequels, and all these kids are going to be out there loving the sequels, thinking they're great.
Yes,
and you're going to feel about them the same way I feel about the prequels.
Yeah,
they're fucking terrible, and just because they were there when you were a kid doesn't make them good cinema.
It's like a story in 3 generations, you know, that whole thing. I haven't even seen episode 9 yet. I kind of, at this point, it's basically a boycott.
Yeah, I will never go back and watch it again.
Yeah.
Zero desire. I watched it once. Zero desire to go back and see it a second time.
Yeah, Ogie's saying he's boycotting too. Yeah, I know. It's, we were so excited. We still have photos of the midnight premiere of episode 7, when that came out. And it was like a whole thing, and we like costumed for it. And went to this, like, it was like a big event at the cinema that we went to. We watched it, and there were people coming out, and there was like this, like, almost like a denial of like, I've invested so much into wanting this movie to be amazing that I will just ignore what just happened and try and justify out like the good bits. And that must have been how people felt about episode 1, as you're saying. And I would look back at it now and I'm just like, the fuck was that movie about? They basically remade episode 4.
Yeah, and I did like it. You know, I thought it was a decent start, and they could have taken it interesting places. And
it definitely had interesting things, but
now looking back on, yeah, but where they took it, it went nowhere, so it sort of, in retrospect, looks worse, because the other 2 films were so bad, and, you know.
I know.
That's my opinion.
I've heard things about episode 9, like I say, I haven't even seen it yet, but sorry, Obi, you're like the stand fast for the whole thing at this point, so...
You can like what you like.
Even I know you love it. It's a whole
anyway, moving back to Kyrian. We should,
yeah, good. So I am at Egwene chewing her lip, focusing on the real problem. The Tower Aes Sedai.
Yes.
I think that's what we're up to.
They are still channeling inside their building, which we know is just useless stuff to cover up the fact that when they kidnap Rand... they're going to be channeling a shield for him, and they don't want people to be suspicious. So they don't want anything to change when they kidnap Rand.
Yeah, right. Okay, that makes sense. I always kind of wondered, like, what the deal was with that. Like, I think when I first read it through, I was like, is this like a weapon? Like, what's going on with this constant channeling? But I think you're absolutely right. It was just let's make this normal. And then it won't be weird when we slap it on him. Oof. Premeditated.
Yeah, and we see that at the end of the last chapter, they're just doing the novice exercises. Like, they're just literally running through novice exercises to make it seem like they're channeling something powerful. So they're literally doing nothing.
Right. So you think it's, like, less of a misdirection as a, yeah, like you say, like, when they actually hit, it'll just seem like nothing is out of the ordinary.
To me, it feels like a very traditional magician's trick, which is, set up the circumstances so that when they change something behind your head, you don't realize when they change it because it's already been that way. I know that's a terrible way of describing it.
Well, no, but I know what you mean. Yeah.
But usually when they switch the ball out is not when you think they switch the ball out. They've swapped it out much earlier or they swap it out much later.
Right.
And that's why it looks like magic.
That's where they say, like, magicians are actually, like, experts in human behavior. That's all that it is. It's reading people and... Yeah, I mean, I could go off on a whole tangent about, like, selective attention, but that's basically what they're doing. So, yeah, maybe this is in the same sort of vein as, like, this is just the new normal in terms of, like, weird channeling coming out of this place and the novice exercises. And on the other hand, maybe they were just really nervous and they were like, we're going to capture the Dragon Reborn, like, let's just, like, center ourselves. Maybe it was, like, a secondary benefit, who knows?
No, I really do think they're doing it so that when they hold his shield, people aren't going to be able to be like, oh my god, Rand disappeared and they're channeling all this power.
Fair enough.
Let's make that. They're trying to prevent.
Yeah. No, I like it.
Speaking of magicians, I have to bring up the fact that James Randi died. I don't know if you know who he is.
No, I don't.
Just classic skeptic and magician. He was in his 90s, just totally irrelevant. But he was a magician who turned his expertise in magic to debunking pseudoscience.
Oh, wow. I like him already.
Yeah, no, he has done so much to debunk psychics, and he put up the $1 Million Challenge, which is if you can come into his institution and prove paranormal abilities in scientific circumstances, he'll give you $1 million.
I guess he never gave his $1 million away.
No, he never gave the $1 million away. But lots and lots of people tried for it, and it was just incredibly good because he knew what all the tricks were, because a lot of the tricks were based on magic.
Yeah, it's human psychology, like.
So he was my hero, and he died yesterday, I think.
I'm sorry.
So or within the last week. So one of those guys, and since we were speaking about magicians, I had to bring that up. That he was the master of misdirection, both telling you he was going to misdirect you and debunking people who were lying to you about misdirecting you.
But like, look over here.
Yeah. So if you enjoy skepticism or debunking or any of that stuff, go look up James Randi. He's also, because he was a magician, he's just entertaining as hell, right? Like, that's the other thing, is like his stage presence is off the chart. Like, yeah, he's so fun to watch. Yeah.
It makes me think of that Science Versus episode where they looked at all this stuff a while back. That one's worth looking at too. Science Versus, I'm sure, is familiar with James Randi. I forgot that I love Science Versus. Great. Oh, I love it too. I don't even remember. I think I've just always been in the periphery of my knowledge about what podcasts are out there. And then about 6 months ago, maybe a year now, I just binged it hard. Like, got through all the episodes, and now I'm like on the, I think they do like weekly releases now or something. Anyway, oh man, so
not
good.
Nearly enough. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they do a lot of research.
Yeah, I love Wendy Zuckerman's voice.
Yeah.
When she talks, like that whole.
She just makes me happy. The way she speaks.
She's got this pep to her that's so good. Yeah.
Yeah. Even in all the COVID episodes that they covered. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, and I love that it's like, I like that I can trust the science that she puts out. Like, that to me is so key, because it's so hard to trust anything in it. Yeah, I know. And when she calls like the co-producer and she's like, "Hey, how many citations in this episode?" Like, the whole thing, I'm just like, that's I like really that little segment. Yeah. Yeah. I like that a lot. It's a really cool thing. But yeah, no, so we've got these Aes Sedai being like magicians and saying, "Don't look over here. Nothing to see here." We've got our nothing to see here. Just channeling, no big deal. Don't look at us. And I just want to confirm. So when Gawyn says that they're looking for an Aes Sedai, like, they're looking for Egwene, right? Because they don't know that it's Egwene. They don't know it's Egwene, but they've heard rumors of a green Aes Sedai among the Aiel who is hanging out with Rand, and they think they're debating over it, but some of them believe it's Moraine, who's quote unquote died and taken on this persona as a green in order to hide. Yeah, they don't believe that at all, do they? They're like, they're not sure what to believe. Yeah, well, one of them doesn't. They don't believe that Moraine's dead. No, yeah, I think Galena likes to deceive herself into fucking Galena. We'll get to that. She wants to be reality. Yeah, definitely. One thing I know Egwene says is that Gawyn had let slip that there was no room even for another scullery maid.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of those scullery maids are Aes Sedai who don't have the face yet.
Yeah, definitely. Could be.
Those are the eyes. Because they said they're going to bring in those quote-unquote scullery maids, but those scullery maids are all the Aes Sedai. That's how they smuggled in those Aes Sedai who are going to link with them and capture Rand.
Yeah.
And the fact that there's not any room for any more makes me think that they've got them all there already. And so they're ready to kidnap him at any point.
Yeah, and we see that later. I noted Egwene sort of... I don't know whether it's a thought or maybe she says it to Rand when they're in the throne room area. Like, you can't tell that they're Aes Sedai just from their faces. You know, like, he still has this thing in his head where he can, like, just tell by looking at them. And she just, like, obviously knows better by that point. Like, that isn't how it works. Obviously, like, she hasn't quite figured out yet the influence of the oaths. That's still to come. But she's kind of, like, it's almost like a foreshadowing for that. Like, you know, you can look a whole lot of different ways and be Aes Sedai because you're young, because you haven't taken the oaths, for heaps of reasons. So, yeah, we kind of get that as well. But I think you're right about the scullery maids. I didn't even think of that, so that's a good pickup.
I just caught that on this reread, because I was like, oh yeah, the scullery maids, that's how they hide all the quote-unquote new Aes Sedai, the young Aes Sedai.
Yeah, good catch.
Richie Rich, I gotta bring this up. The Reds are attempting a sleight of Rand instead of a sleight of hand.
Richie Rich. Nice one. I love it. I'm here for the puns, by the way. So you can, like... I know the others are kind of just, like, you know, get frustrated with it, but, like...
Some people are middle on puns. You know, and the thing is, you can't force a pun, right? Like, you can hide a pun, but when puns come, they've got to go.
They just got to, like...
let it out. Just relax.
Like that. Exactly.
Yeah.
So just, like, let the puns flow.
Yes, let the puns flow through you. Excellent.
I was thinking of Dune, actually, but that works too.
Oh yeah, let's hear
not that
it.
I've read Dune, but like that's on my list too. But I know that that's a thing. Anyway, so I'm just summarizing. So Egwene is walking back. She's heading back to the tents outside Carian to the Aiel camp, and she's probably like blushing like hell, thinking about Gawyn and thinking about all this stuff that we just spoken about. How she realizes now that she's being looked for, and that there must be other Aes Sedai in the city.
Here we get the line about 7 nights she's going to meet with the Saladar Aes Sedai, and that's when she's going to be summoned.
So 7 days, basically, from being Amyrlin. I just kind of like that. It probably doesn't mean anything, but like that synchronicity. 7 nights till Amyrlin, 7 Ajahs. I don't know. There's nothing there, most likely.
Sure.
But I kind of just thought that. I don't know.
She has 1 day for each Ajah.
Yeah.
Left.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the countdown. One thing I noticed she says here is she's talking about how in her dreams, every time, and we saw this once before, actually. This is the second time she's talked about how she keeps having these dreams of something breaking whenever she thinks about interacting with Egwene, or with Elaine and Nynaeve. And I was curious if you had any ideas.
I highlighted that as a question I was going to ask you.
Okay.
So, yeah, she has that thoughts about the hazy, almost nightmare is the quote that she sure has meaning. I just thought maybe, like, is it something to do with Abu Dar and searching in the Rahad? And, like, some sort of foreshadowing for, like, that awful sea folk deal that results eventually from all of that? I don't know. That's the only thing that I could think of, so over to you.
Yeah. There was that. There's also... Oh, Ogier Tendency says it's the friendship. I like that. That she can't be friends with them in the same way because she's Amyrlin, and that's the shattering of the friendship. I can see that.
That's like an Occam's razor sort of interpretation. I like that, yeah.
I was thinking that it had to do with the fact that, like, in the next couple of scenes, Nynaeve heals Logain, heals Suan and Leanne, and then they figure out in desperation where the Bowl of the Winds are, and if Egwene had contacted them, maybe they wouldn't have done all those things in desperation, and, like, they need to do those things. And so her dreams may be saying, like, if you contact them, like, the world won't be saved, because they need to do these things. And part of the reason they're doing them is because they have zero contact and information from you, and they're very frustrated by it.
Yeah.
But that's kind of a roundabout, complicated way to justify that.
Yeah, it honestly could mean a lot of things. Like, it could mean potentially, because it is so vague, like, we know that it does mean something because she has that feeling as a dreamer, capital D dreamer, like, she knows that it means something, but, and she notes here, like, that she has been working a little bit harder on, like, trying to interpret them, but she can't figure this one out. So maybe it's got multiple meanings. Like, can dreams do that? It could mean the friendship thing, it could mean the Bowl of the Winds, like, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Either way, it's keeping her from contacting her friends. And so we do get a lot from Elaine and Nynaeve's POV being like, where is she? And this explains, like, why she hasn't bothered to contact them and talk to them. Is these sort of warning dreams of something breaking. If she, and because obviously she doesn't contact them, we never see what would have broken. Right? It's like, it's almost like she heeds the warning, so therefore we never get to find out what the warning was about.
But she obviously knows all about Saladar. She just hasn't been there yet. Because that's a break that's already happened.
Or maybe, like, that would have prevented the unification of the tower somehow?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. It's one of those things that's like, the thread almost, like, splits and goes, like, the potential features, but obviously, like, we just only see one of those routes, so, we never really know. Yeah.
Yeah, Richie Rich is like, oh my god, Egwene heeding a warning? Oh, what's going on? Is she okay? She's sick?
To be fair though, like, she tries to. She gets the Sean Chan warning, like, super early on.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Totally. She tries to, I mean, it was also because anything Sean Chan, like, she immediately pays attention to because of her trauma.
I guess I'd be more shocked if it was Elaine heeding a warning.
Yeah. Elaine's the one who's like, but I'll be fine.
I got a prophecy, I'm good.
Yeah. Elaine's the she'll be right character of the Supergirls, for sure. Particularly after she's got Brigitte. Cool. So then she thinks a little bit about that, and then is it Suranda, the apprentice?
Yeah.
Asks her to join them, and they have a free day, which is nice. I get the sense that they don't get a lot of time to themselves as apprentices, so...
No.
That's super...
Sometimes she even talks about getting, like, a half day, and that being, like, a lot. Getting, like, an afternoon to herself is a big deal.
Yeah.
And that's why sort of she's doing two things at once when she goes and visits Gawyn. She's both running her punishment, but she's kind of, like, also using that time to visit Gawyn. But she's supposed to be running the whole time.
Yeah. Right. I didn't even pick up on that. That's a good point.
She's supposed to be running around the city.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, I can run through the city. And they're like, yeah. And she's not running through the city.
She's
doing all sorts of other things.
Yeah, that's probably the other reason why she's like, Gawyn, we said we'd walk. Obviously then, I mean, she never tells those wise ones the reason that she can't really do that going forward. Because she can't. Because they think she is Aes Sedai. And that would be a whole thing, if she was to get recognised. Even if it's outside the city.
Although she does say that, like, here, like, it's bad blood between first sisters. The worst bad blood is between first sisters, Samara said with a nod. She's trying to basically say, I don't know if she tells the wise ones that, but they're aware of the division. She certainly tells the maidens, like, I don't want them to know about my presence because...
Oh, yeah,
later
on. Yeah. Yeah, she like, fully Aes Sedai's herself into that room. It's like a, yes, I'm just gonna leverage what you believe about me without me saying anything, and I'm not lying.
The lying with just omission rather than outright lying.
Exactly, because the way the oath is phrased doesn't say anything about lying by omission. I always thought that was interesting.
No, sure as hell doesn't.
Yeah, and obviously that's the biggest hole that gets exploited. So just while they're in the tents, though, I thought it was really funny. There's probably other stuff that you would have picked up from this, but the older woman, Mira, seems to be suggesting that the best way to manage men is by fucking them. Did you pick up on that? Like, I was like...
I'm not sure I picked up quite on that, but yeah, I definitely got some of that.
She just, like, leans across and she's like, well, if you're having trouble with men, then you know what to do, wink, wink. And they're all just, like, scandalized. Well, Egwene is, and the others are just, like... laughing. I love it.
Yeah. That
was funny, I thought. It's just a very Aiel humour. And I also noticed in here, what does Egwene say? And she actually successfully makes an Aiel joke, which seems to be such a challenge for all the Wetlanders the entire time.
Right. For me, that's very much about how Egwene has adapted and, gone native. She's danced with the wolves, this thing, right? She's suddenly part of their culture and understands their culture, and like in ways we see later when she's all about like she's dismissive of the servants.
Yeah, I picked up on that as well.
The way an Aiel would be. Yeah, and it's just like the Aiel way of life is in her head, and she doesn't even realize it in some ways.
Absolutely. I think that's when she kind of gets it the most. Just like when she kind of like gets in her own head about like what does it mean to be Aiel, and like and overthinks it. That seems to be when she doesn't get it. But it's like moments like this, she's just hanging out with these ladies in this tent, and they're just drinking tea. They're just hanging out. She's thinking about Gawyn a little bit, and then she just says, "So Relia could make any number of Aes Sedai sit up straight." And it's like, it must be this like juxtaposition between like a wise one and an Aes Sedai that makes that like so funny to the other apprentices. Because even Esther, who's like described as this really straight-laced, serious apprentice, laughs faintly. Like, so I just thought that was like a really natural moment, as you say, like she's gone native with them, so to speak.
Yeah, and I just love their interactions here. It's just a very sisterly...
Absolutely.
And it just shows how much she's grown into this... How comfortable she's become with herself and the people around her, and her power and her opinions mattering. And then to go back to the White Tower as an apprentice, I mean, like, it would never have worked.
Oh, God, no.
And I don't think they realize... Yeah, and, you know, when they pulled her and were like, we have a manipulatable child, it's like, no, you have... iron-backed wise one. Different things.
Exactly. And I mean, we only really get it as a reader, at least, well, I'll speak for myself, I guess, the way that the wise one training works when we see Avienda finally being forced into like taking her control over it.
Sure.
Towards the end.
I think I knew strength of will was important, especially
Yes.
with Cerelia, but...
Yes. But that's basically the graduation, when you tell them to go away. And it's like, no, like, ladies, I've got this now. That's when you... Yeah, and so that's exactly right. She's basically a full-blown wise one by the time she becomes Amyrlin, which is really cool. And Definitely. They were never to know that, because obviously the Aes Sedai, even if they'd really... I mean, they kind of knew that she was with them. They just constantly discount any other channel or training program, you know, any
or
other
opinions.
Culture or opinions.
Yeah.
And they would basically like, oh, what would she have been doing? Like drinking tea in the desert? Like big whoop. She's basically still an accepted, in our way of thinking about things. So she's a kid and she'd be manipulatable. And that, I think that's like at a more meta level, like that's RJ again hitting us with the like cultures clash, things change, get on with it sort of summary that I'm paraphrasing that, but you know, he made that summary of the series. And it's another way of seeing, you know, there's a different way of looking at the world, and it's important. I think that's the Aes Sedai serve as such a limited lens to kind of highlight that exact theme just so many times. And this is like, yeah, this moment is like one of those for me. So yeah, bringing it back down to what's happening.
Sure. So we see her. We see a little Taviran twisting when these two women try and pass each other and end up doing the whole mirror dance.
Yeah,
which I thought was one of those examples. Just wanted to bring that up.
Absolutely.
And then go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, like, haven't we all had that moment of like just in the street being like, oh, excuse me, like that happened to me a few weeks ago, and this guy got really frustrated, and I was like, oh, I'm sorry, there must be like a random in the city or something, because we can't seem to figure this really basic social psychological phenomenon going on to like not run into each other in the street. But anyway, sorry, just it's so relatable.
Because like 99% of the time we're able to walk past each other in the street, but every once in a while you move in the same direction as somebody else, and it's just like, wait, what? And it might happen once or twice with a random person in the street, but here it just keeps happening.
Yeah, I think I just loved that it was such a relatable example as I was reading. I was like, yeah, it's... What are the chances? But yeah.
No, that always stuck with me as a really good Taviran twisting randomness. You see it in old TV too, where like two people, like you see the person like stick their hand out and it's like an opening and someone is trying to hide and does the same thing they do. It's like those old timey. You ever seen those old timey like silent movies?
Yeah.
I feel like that was a gig that like Charlie Chaplin used to do, where he would like
very Chaplin.
Yeah.
It's like physical comedy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's a funny Taviran moment for sure. And she's just like, oh my goodness, yep, Rand has definitely arrived in the city. Let's see what's going on. And then we had the moment that we talked about before, where Samara just assumes Egwene's purpose when she gets there, and it's just like, yeah, one of those sort of Aes Sedai moments where she is internalizing what that means.
So you're saying she assumes she's there to what?
To give some sort of a note from the wise ones. Isn't that what she says? Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And from the look of her, they have sent her running with strong words for Rand al'Thor.
That's it.
Running? Marie's chuckle softened. Neither face nor eyes.
Oh, God,
crawling,
yeah.
It looks. Because she's covered in dust, right? She's been running outside, and she's been sweating. She's got, like, dust caked all over her face. And she's trying to be all dignified and Aes Sedai, and she looks like a muddy puppy.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. It would have been the sweat and the humidity, the dirt in the city.
Yeah. Right before that, we get that little flash. She felt a flash of contempt as she dismissed him. And this is the servant who led her there. She could not understand why. He was simply doing what he was paid to do.
Yes. I absolutely noticed that moment too. I was going to go back to it as well. Yeah, and she's just... I mean, it's internalizing the... Like, if you're not Guy Shine and you're a servant...
Why are you being a servant?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's disgusting. It's low. It's not honorable. Not an honorable way to live.
Yeah, again, it's like, as we were sort of saying before, like, that's her moment of, like, contrasting in her brain, like, the internalizing of the Aiel culture, and then bringing back in what she grew up with, she grew up in an inn herself, with her family, and she totally gets it, but then there's this weird moment in her mind, so I thought that was really interesting that he pointed that out.
So the next thing I have her is she walks in on Rand, and he is looking all... He looked a king and one about to do murder because he is waiting for the Tower Aes Sedai to walk in. So she basically walks in on him in all his glory. He's like set up to receive the Tower Aes Sedai. And so that is what I call Emperor Rand al'Thor.
Absolutely. He seems to have just been sitting there stewing because he was not expecting them for another couple of hours, I think, but he obviously had nothing better to do, and he was sort of like, just ready for them as soon as they came in, because when they do arrive, probably in about, 20 to 30 minutes in book time, he kind of has a thought that they came sooner than what he was expecting, and he's obviously had this conversation in the interim and has to reassume this exact mood that he was in when Egwene walks in on him.
And I love Egwene walking in, covered in dirt, being like, "You wash your ears right this instant, young man." Just filthy, just disgusting, like covered in dirt and mud and like swirled on her forehead where she like rubbed it in and not rubbed it off. Yeah, I wonder if the Aiel set her up for that one.
Yeah, I mean, at least they told her that she was filthy. They could have just like let it slide and be like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if she just didn't know? That would be very Aiel humor, I think. But obviously, Samara has enough respect for her that, well, it was the other guy, wasn't it, who actually pointed it out. But yeah, I know it struck me as a very like naive, don't shout at me moment. Like, but again, with the more physical humor going on, with I think it's really funny as well. And I just think this whole scene is like Rand and Egwene here seem to really graduate into that relationship more like siblings by this point.
Yeah.
And I love their relationship here. Like, it gets awkward at the end, but they had that, obviously, like, way back, they were going to be betrothed, and then they kind of had that weird breakup situation, then they didn't see each other for ages, and now they feel like brother and sister.
And they're giving each other a hard time, but they're, like, having fun with it, She's like, wash your ear behind your ears, and he's all grinning and happy and being like, okay, mud-covered puppy. Like,
yeah, exactly.
And I love her whole thing with the water, where he's like, "Let me get you some water." And she's like, "No," and then later she's like, "I should have gotten the water, but I can't ask now. It's too late, and I can't go back." And it's like,
because he'll never let me live it down.
Absolutely, go. It's a cross between Game of Houses and sort of sibling rivalry.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the whole time she's trying to manipulate him to be angry at them and explode, in just enough to put their backs up.
Right.
And, like, he completely plays her because she has that thought
Oh,
where she's
totally.
where he's like, yeah, okay, I get it, because she's saying what she's saying to him is be calm, be polite, because she doesn't expect him to listen to her, but instead he plays her.
Reverse psychology.
Yeah, they like reverse psychology each other.
Totally.
Basically.
Well, and she's treating him like the Rand Two Rivers farm boy.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
he's been playing Game of Houses with and Jiito with the best, the Kyrians, the Endors, all these different folks. Yeah, and so she tries to manipulate him in like the most obvious, blatant reverse psychology,
yes,
and he's just like grinning at her with no actual smile in his eyes because he's like, "Oh, you're gonna manipulate me too?
Yeah,
fine." Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's definitely, he sees right through her and then totally promises to do exactly what she doesn't want him to do, with no intention of following through.
Yeah, I know. So he says, proper deference, he said thoughtfully. With a sigh, he shook his head ruefully, scrubbed a hand through his hair. I suppose I can't talk to an Aes Sedai the same way I do to some lord who's been plotting behind my back. It's good advice, Egwene. I'll try. I will be as humble as a mouse. And she's just like... And she's like... No, what the fuck? Like, you're meant to, like, do the opposite. But you're right. I think he sees through it from day dot, like, absolutely. From the first
absolutely.
moment. Yeah.
Did you say day dark?
I said day dot, but then I realised it's, like, from the first moment. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's a thing with the sea folk. That's, like, the undercurrent for this whole chapter, which comes up in the next one.
He's avoiding them.
Just gonna, like... let them stew, I think were his words. It's a bad idea, Brand.
I always come back, there's actually a line in the next chapter where he says, they're not mentioned in the prophecies. Maybe in their ships, they don't have to be caught up in my chaos. Like, he's literally it's a terrible idea, but he's literally trying to spare them the breaking that he knows is prophesized. That's why he's avoiding them. Misguided, but it's out of good ideas, good thoughts.
Yeah, that's how he intellectualizes it, but I think he just can't be bothered.
There's that too, yeah.
I think he's so tired and so, like, pulled in every direction. And then obviously there's the madness, which we haven't even talked about yet. And so, like, he's just pulled in every direction, and I think that's part of it. But yeah, he just can't. He doesn't have the energy for it.
I see him right now. His movements are more based around the women in his life. The rape, the bonding against his will, has caused him to flee. Avienda's caused him to flee. He's looking for Elaine. Like, there's all this... Most of his movements aren't necessarily based around strategy. They're based around the women that are driving him insane.
He's being so reactive.
Yes, very reactive to the women around him. Yeah. Just, like, fleeing randomly.
Yeah. Maybe that's a pattern a little bit, kind of, like, forcing him to be... where he needs to be at certain points in time a little bit, but like, yeah, I know he's being a reactive angry boy at the moment, and
he's also trying to rule two kingdoms and 5 people at the same time, so he's getting pulled all over the place while staging a war against Samael. So
yeah,
I can see where he may be a little scatterbrained.
You can imagine yourself in that situation, and you're like, and here's this third party, like these are the whole thing that you need to deal with, and he's just like, no.
Hell, I can barely manage a podcast, much less a couple of countries. Jesus.
Yeah, but I mean, I've definitely been in that moment at work where I'm just kind of like, another thing, do I really, like, is this urgent and important? Nah, I'm just gonna, like, delegate that. I follow the Eisenhower method, if anybody... It's like an obscure...
I don't know that one.
Yeah, it's like a personal organization method, basically. It's very simple. It's a table with 4 quadrants, and you've got urgent and important across the 2 axes. And basically, if it's urgent and important task, like, do it straight away. If it's important but not urgent, delegate. And I forget what the other ones are. But basically, yeah, he's like, nah, I've got enough on my plate, so I'm just gonna... deprioritize those guys, and eventually he does essentially delegate it, and ends up with that terrible, what he thinks at the time is that terrible agreement that the 2 Aes Sedai have to end up negotiating after he leaves and his Teviran influence leaves the ship.
Not that he honors it.
In the next book, that happens, doesn't it?
Ever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
they're like, oh, we have to call on you twice a year. He never honors that part of the deal. He dies too soon. He's dead within 6 months. So, or quote unquote dead.
Oh,
within 6
yeah.
months.
Is that? I always thought, like, was that agreement included in the dragons piece? You know how they say, like, all of the land is blocked where it is.
Yeah, I don't think, because I think that was with the dragon himself and not with anyone else.
Yeah.
So
They got.
I mean, they get to keep their lands, but I didn't see anything in that
Yeah.
negotiation that would have carried over.
Am I right in saying that it's that wave mistress? Sorry, ship.
The wave mistress who becomes
Yeah. She's the one who becomes mistress of all the ships. So she gets a good deal out of it in the end because Min had that viewing of her.
Right, and she gets like beaten for a while and hung up, but eventually rises through the ranks and becomes the leader.
And that's an example of Min's viewing kind of like actually pulling someone through all of their hardship, most likely. Yeah. Just to call it a Richie Rich. So yeah, he's pulled out. That's the Eisenhower thing. Do, delegate, dump, diarize. Love it. It's a great way of prioritizing your work if you're overworked. Anyway, that's the total side note. So anyway, that's essentially what he's
Not heard that before. Do, delegate, dump, diarize.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good method. I like it. And but yeah, because he says here the Army are everywhere it seems, and takes a seat, and he keeps talking to Egwene.
I was going to say we get some Barrelane in here.
Yes,
or some conversation about Barrelane.
Yeah.
Why do you think Egwene and Barrelane do not get along?
Well, I kind of chalked it up to kind of like a typical Two Rivers slut shaming way of thinking about the world. To be honest, like it's very basic interpretation. I don't know. I think the only other time, correct me if I'm wrong, the only other time that she met Barrelane was in the Stone of Tyr.
I was gonna say in the stone, yeah.
Yeah, and that was the time when she was like really overtly trying to get with one of the boys, and there was that whole thing at the beginning of Shadow Rising, I think it was. That
night that Barrelane was in Rand's chambers for the first bubble of evil.
Yes, yeah. I feel like it was around that period that Egwene, because they were all staying there at the same time, and so she would have only seen her in that seducing mode. So that's what I thought, but
yeah, I'm pretty much agree with you there. Yeah,
she's doing a job, Barrelane. I mean, and obviously we see a lot more of her character here. My favorite Barrelane mode is Administrator. I think she's amazing, and she gets way too much flack from the girls because they're just like Puritan, you know.
Well, and the fact is, she's not even someone who sleeps around, right? She says like she slept with 2 other people, and like, damn, that's almost restrictive. Like, she uses her body to convince people that she might sleep with them, right? It's this whole seduction without it feels very
Damani?
Damani, thank you. Yes, where it's like, I'm gonna not necessarily promise I'm gonna sleep with you, but make you think that that's a possibility, and I'm gonna use that to get what I want.
It's like putting the man in manipulation. That was inspired by Jesus here.
Isn't everything inspired by Jesus?
Oh, I mean, exactly. We're blessed by her presence tonight. But yeah, so...
It's been at least 3 days since I've seen her.
Yep. Well, I mean...
Yep.
There you go.
I rose from the internet.
Just always around us. But Ogi is also saying here there's probably a bit of like... Actually, this could be interesting because it's like maybe a bit of the Aiel honor thing going on as well. So Elaine is Egwene's friend, right? And Barrelane was trying to seduce Rand at that time. And so in the same way that Abby Ender's like, she's basically my first sister and I will defend her honor, maybe it's a little bit of the same thing creeping into Egwene's subconscious as well. Yeah, I like that, actually, now that I've said it out loud.
I'm nodding.
Yeah, nice. Barrelane gets a lot of undeserved criticism from the girls in these books. She's really good at her job. I think she deserves respect for that.
She's the only ruler who starts out at the beginning of these books ruling her country and is also ruling it at the end of these books. Like, I can't think of a single other ruler in Eye of the World who is still around.
Yeah.
Except maybe some of the Borderlanders, but I think most of them die.
Yeah.
In the last battle.
They're like, yeah, I think you're right. The only thing that I don't like about her is her predation of Perrin.
Right.
It's not
right.
very.
And
It's not very nice.
it's not nice. And in a lot of ways, she sees it she definitely sees it as a business relationship more than anything else. She doesn't see it as sort of the personal. She sees herself as a better match technically for Perrin than Fael, and therefore sees no reason why she shouldn't pursue it.
Yeah, even including entrapment and
Right.
rumors and that whole piece, which is probably one of the things that makes people hate that whole series of scenes and the slug, because it's not just Perrin looking for Fael, it's him being hounded by the Hawk through the whole period as well, right? Like, that's like, he's being pursued by the Hawk while looking for the
Falcon.
Falcon, of course.
The Falcon.
Falcon, that's right.
I would have liked to have seen, I think what would have made me happier with that storyline is a reconciliation between Berelain and Fael much earlier in the series. And then having them work together to really support Perrin as king, Fael as his wife, and Berelain as an administrator.
Yeah.
Which they do eventually get to, but I would have loved to have seen that much, much earlier and had much less conflict between them and much more cooperation between them.
Absolutely, that would have been. But then that comes back to that meme about, like, the Wheel of Time books as they are, and then as, like, the stack of 15 books, and it's like the Wheel of Time books if they talk to each other.
Right.
Which is, like, one book.
Well, yeah, 2 books long.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, totally. I 100% agree with that. But I think I would have enjoyed the whole Fael being captured storyline a lot better if she and Berelain had reconciled beforehand, and Berelain was actually there in a support role for Perrin that entire time with Fael's blessing.
Yeah. I suppose I haven't really thought about this, but I suppose there would be a counter-argument there around what that does to Perrin's character and how that makes him forge the alliances that he ends up forging, and whether or not that would have happened if not for that interpersonal drama being cranked up to 11. You know what I mean? So, yeah, there's something in that.
I honestly think the interpersonal drama would have not stopped anything, but
maybe. Yeah, possibly.
Because I don't think it was the interpersonal drama. I think it was his desire to get Fael back, and that could have been the same.
True.
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 Yeah.
Yeah.
Like she could have been a accepted advisor, and because she basically did. Like, while Fael was gone, she wasn't trying to compete with her anymore. She essentially became that sort of trusted advisor that Perrin really needed. It just would have been nicer if that had happened before. If Fael and Berelain had come to that sort of a combination before she got kidnapped rather than after.
Maybe I'm just misremembering some of the interpersonal stuff, because I guess I just get frustrated with that whole thing as well. It's interesting, there's important stuff in there, don't get me wrong, but
Okay.
Yeah. One of those moments. Well, I think first of all we see, or maybe it's all wrapped up in the same moment, Rand's madness, and
yes, we do.
And Egwene, from Egwene's perspective, so it's the outside point of view, and we also see the look on Samara's face.
Which is great, because the next chapter...
Yeah.
The next chapter is the inside point of view, so you get to compare those two.
That's right, yeah, exactly. And then her, implicit bias against Saidin, when he puts that weave on her to hide her.
Sure.
And she's just like, ew, it's icky, is it touching me? And then she's just like, no, intellectually, I know that isn't how it works, but, I mean, when you're raised your whole life and 300 years of, no, longer, 3,000 years of bias against, well, probably a word stronger than bias, actually, against the male channeling at all, you can understand it.
She panicked. I wanted to talk a little bit about this moment when they announced the Aes Sedai are coming in, and she says, "They mustn't know I'm here, Rand. Rand, are you listening to me?" He spoke, but definitely not to her. "You are there," he whispered hoarsely. "Too much coincidence for you to think of that now. Burn me. Burn you. Answer me. I know you're there." So, I think that LTT basically came up was like, oh, this is how you do an invisibility barrier.
Yes.
And Rand's like, you couldn't have just thought about that.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, that's way too much of a coincidence that you thought of that right when Egwene was saying, I need to hide. So therefore, you must be aware of what's going on outside of me.
Right. And I mean, this happens all the time, where there's an outside influence, and then the voice starts in his head, and I think like seems to be triggered by the three Aes Sedai arriving, and obviously we don't hear because it's from an outside perspective what he says to him. So I'm interested in diving into your theory a little bit. So there's Luz Theron, Rand, and LTT. And so what is it? So there's Luz is, for your kind of theory, is the personification of Rand's madness, and LTT coming through.
I call LTT the personification of the madness, yeah. Whereas Luz is
the sort of knowledge seeping through. Is that...
Sure, I more think of Lewis as the guy who lived in the Age of Legends, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there literally was... If I talk about Lewis Theron Telamon, I'm talking about a guy who lived 3,000 years ago and went insane and killed himself on Dragon Mount.
And then his memories bleed through. So, like...
And his memories bleed through.
Which is where we're getting this inverted light weave, or whatever it is.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But the voice itself, the LTT voice, is simply a manifestation of the madness.
Mm-hmm. You know, for the longest time, I was like, no, it's all real. I just was like, I think, and the reason that I kind of thought that, and I think a lot of people do, is because we get so much of it from Rand's own point of view. And so I kind of just believed him, stupidly. I mean, why would I trust, his own point of view when he's wrong so much of the time? But I think it's a much more interesting interpretation of what's going on at those three different levels, sort of thing, particularly in a reread.
Oh, absolutely. And what convinced me is I heard a quote from Robert Jordan where he said, I wrote Rand to be crazy, and people didn't, from his POV, people were convinced that he was still sane. Mm-hmm. And so I decided to take it as a challenge on myself to write him as crazy as I possibly could, but from his perspective. And so there's this quote from Robert Jordan that made me go, oh, Robert Jordan was writing Rand as insane, right? Like,
right.
Rand is nuts, right? And, like, he is trying to make it as obvious as he can to us as the readers, but we're so wrapped up in Rand's POV that we're like, no, he's not insane. Surely something else is going on here. Even though we're told the power is going to make him insane, we see people around him thinking he's insane.
Yeah.
We see him talking to a madman in his head who's insane. The problem is he gets real information from the insane man.
Yes.
And that throws everybody off.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, you wrap that in with the fact that he's, like, not sleeping and he has legitimate personal trauma and, like, everything else. And it's this beautiful mess of what is really going on.
I think about the same way after Rand crosses the streams and the girls use the Bowl of the Winds, and we have these two different effects that are fucking with the way he can touch Saidar.
Right, yeah, exactly. There's, like, added complexity.
Totally. And it's hard to pull those apart, because it's two effects happening at the same time with similar sort of effects. And I think that the madness, the taint is causing two different effects that are conflating. They're both causing the madness, and they're causing the breakdown between him and his past life.
Yeah. So I, in my first couple of read-throughs, just had that second, the bleed through as, like, the main interpretation of, like, well, yeah, obviously, the taint is doing something to his brain, and, like, this is what it is. But yeah, I think having both going on, plus his own, main consciousness as well, I think it's, like, a much more interesting, even for people who maybe aren't completely on board yet, like, just consider it, like, but yeah, so I'm on board with that now. It's good.
Well, and for me especially, the LTT in his head can't be Lewis Theron, because when Lewis Theron was sane, he wasn't, obviously it can't be sane Lewis Theron, because this person LTT in his head is insane.
When Lewis Theron died, he was crazy, because
but he was crazy.
Scene. Yeah.
But that was such a short period of time that can't be, unless you're saying that the spirit of LTT is somehow alive in his head later, but except Rand is that spirit. So then you're talking, like, it can't be a separate entity. Rand is Lewis Theron. So LTT, which is this other person, has to be an artificial creation of Rand's mind.
And so then the unification moment is on the mountain is incorporating not LTT, the madness, but accepting his past life.
Yeah, but it's basically integrating all his past memories into his head. Yeah.
Yeah. Ogia had a question in the chat around explaining how LTT gives Rand all the rediscovered waves.
Yeah, this is sort of the... Why is Rand the only person who gets memories of his past life from the taint? Why is the information coming out in him and nobody else? That's what makes him the Dragon Reborn.
Yeah.
That's literally what makes him the Dragon Reborn. You know, that's there's nothing else. That's the way the taint manifests in his brain, and that's, you know, he was the dragon, and now he's reborn, and he gets access to the memories of the dragon, so he is, you know, no one else is Arthur Hawkwing Reborn. Right. There is no Arthur Hawkwing Reborn. Right. There is just the Dragon
story,
Reborn.
and it's weaving.
Yeah.
No, like turning. Yeah.
Well, and I'm sure that Arthur Hawkwing is reborn, but when he's reborn, no one calls him Arthur Hawkwing Reborn. They just call him whatever his name is.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
It's not Geidel Kane Reborn. It's not Brigida Reborn. Like that. None of those people get their memories
unless they're pulled out like Brigida is.
Sure. Well,
out of order. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, out of order. Yeah.
Which kind of goes into kind of analyzing what happened with her. Kind of like gives a little bit of credence to this sort of way of thinking about it too, in a sense. And with Rand being the Dragon Reborn, as you just explained, it's almost like there's like a more thin barrier or something like that in the pattern between the two weavings, the two turnings, and yeah, that whole thing. So, and here, so we see him struggling with that, because obviously at this point, this whole couple of chapters together is him still struggling with that. And
so I got to answer one more question from Ogier, and then I want to move on from this. Do previous dragons get the previous dragon's memories in the same way? Because they wouldn't experience the taint because the boring doesn't happen in every turning of the wheel. Well, if the boring doesn't happen, then you don't need a dragon to seal it. Then you don't get a tainted thing. So, like, if the boring doesn't happen, you don't need a dragon, and you don't need a dragon reborn. So that's my answer. Is like, if you don't have a boar, then you don't need the dragon, and you don't need the dragon reborn.
It's very like self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it?
Definitely, yeah. Totally.
That is the Corythian cycle.
The creation of the boar is what led to the dragon reborn. The dragon reborn is what leads to the sealing of the boar.
Circular logic, which I can see would not be satisfying to some people.
Definitely. Well, which is what happens when you have circular time. Right. Well, yeah, and that's the thing, is like cause and effect don't really work that way in the Wheel of Time, because time is a circle, and so between prophecy, the effect can affect the cause, which I know is a terrible way of saying that, but like,
yeah,
we can know that what the outcome is, and then adjust the parameters to have that happen. And I think a lot of what Rand does is like he does actions based on the prophecies, like the effect changes his actions.
And I kind of look at it like, visualize it a little bit like concentric circles in a kind of like moving up, right? Because obviously like it's a linear timeline, but except it's not. So it's like as if you're going to draw like a spiral from the bottom up, and then it kind of like folds back on itself, and then it spirals up, and then it falls back on itself, sort of thing, which kind of blows my mind. But RJ was a physicist, right? So he was kind of like leaning on, I don't know, was it
right.
quantum theory, which I just
don't have
the brains power
I mean, the
for.
theories right now, you said you look at history. I love watching quantum theory YouTube videos, and there's all sorts of theories about the idea, and no one knows for sure, because the reality is we know what happened up to the Big Bang up until like 10 to the negative 32 seconds before it started. And so the question is, before that, Planck time, in this tiny fraction of a second before we know what happened, was there nothing? Was there another universe that was crunching? Was there a big crunch leading up to the Big Bang? Was there a singularity? Like, we have zero idea. The Big Bang isn't really the right way to think about it, because it wasn't an explosion. It was just an expansion of infinite space everywhere, but it was already infinite. So it's just getting more. The infinities are just getting bigger in a lot of ways. It's the Big Bang is hard to really wrap your head around. We don't really know what happened.
Yeah, I know, and I feel like humans aren't really built to think about stuff like that efficiently.
No,
You know what I
no,
mean?
because we
It's
don't
just
have any
like-
intuition about it. Yeah.
We developed in a very terrestrial.
A saying in quantum physics is shut up and calculate.
Oh, really?
Because the reality is, like, your intuition just doesn't work. Like, you literally
Yes.
have to do the math to understand what's going on, because your intuition fails every time. And so when people are like, oh, I don't understand that, it's like, well, just shut up and calculate. That's really the only way to figure it out.
Yeah, I keep dropping other podcast names in this episode, but a really good one is The Infinite Monkey Cage from BBC4. And it's got, forgetting his name, he's a British physicist who's kind of a rock star. What's his name? I'll think of his name later. I'll drop it in
Brian
the
Cox?
chat. Yes, Brian Cox. He hosts it with a comedian, and that they do different science topics every episode. And they did one on quantum physics, quantum mechanics, and like Schrodinger's cat. And I was listening to it and doing the garden or something, and I was like, what is real? We're like way off topic from the chapter right now, but I was just like, what is this? You should check it out.
I love it when it does that to my brain. I will. Yeah, definitely.
Anyway.
That sounds right up my alley. Yeah. Sounds right up my alley.
They talk about heaps of different topics, but yeah, there's one, it's like a panel interview style podcast, and there's a comedian who keeps it like light and like grounds it, and there's Brian Cox being intellectual as hell, and then like another couple of guests, and I'm just like, mind blown moment. Anyway, so that all came from a discussion of Rand's madness, so I suppose it's appropriate that we ended up in mind-blowing moments.
Completely mad about that, yeah.
I'm feeling confused. And so, what did I have next? So, yeah, I just thought...
So we're talking about the curtain, the invisibility curtain.
Yeah, I thought it was some sort of inverted light. What did you think?
Sure, yeah. I mean, it doesn't seem, fire and air, like, that seems pretty standard. He just got the weave from Lewis Theron, and the thing is, I think Lewis Theron, LTT in his head, fled. He, like, gave him the weave and then ran away, so he's like, burn him. That's what that burn him is. And she's like, wait, who's he talking to? Who's the him?
Yeah.
And it's Lewis Theron.
And Samara's, like, gazing at him like a concerned mother or sister or something. Kind of being concerned, that whole like maidens looking after the one child of a maiden moment, kind of humanizing that sort of moment in Rand's mind. And I just wanted to point out, I loved that Egwene's first reaction after this, talking to himself moment that she witnesses is to try and heal him. She's like, I'm shit at healing, it's not my biggest skill, but like, she's thinking about how like trained by Nynaeve, and her hand on his forehead, and she just wants to help him. And I thought that was so lovely, Yeah. And then he shies back from her hand, and gets really...
And he knows it's just madness. Like, that's the thing, is he knows it's madness.
Yeah.
That's why he's like, you can't help me. This is the taint.
Yeah, and I just think it's like him putting his metaphorical armor back on, because he's like, I can't be human, like I can't be healed like a regular person because I can't be a regular person. I can't be emotionally available because I'm not letting myself do that. And then, so then we have the moment where he pulls her to behind the throne, is it? So she's kind of probably in shadow.
I think just beside the throne,
Yeah. And then puts her in this cloak of invisibility, which is really cool.
I want you to see how respectful I can be.
Yeah, but then he's like, does it, and then he's like, look in the mirror, because she's like, I don't, like, what did you do? And she can't see herself. Yeah. And she just, like, gasps. There aren't that many more moments in the whole series where Egwene gets surprised by something. So I thought that was kind of a cute thing as well. And then she's like, I'm invisible, she breathed. Once Moraine had hidden them all behind a screen of Saidar, but how had he learned it? Well, we just talked about that, so...
Right. I also feel like that's something isn't very common for Aes Sedai to know how to do. Like, that's what almost seems like a lost weave. Like people are surprised that I can't remember the exact quote, but I feel like someone's is like, oh, invisibility's hard.
Yeah.
And like I think the fact that Moraine can do it, I think we talked about this once where someone said like, oh, we can't go invisible, and we're like, wait, didn't Moraine do that once? Yeah. I guess she's just that talented that she has that ability. I wonder if that's a bit of an inconsistency, where the sort of invisibility cloak is supposed to be too hard.
I don't know. I feel like it's one of those ones Yeah, I feel like it's one of those ones that almost like the Saladar Mogedian quote-unquote rediscovered weaves, where some of the Aes Sedai just kind of like relearn them surprisingly quickly, and it's more like oh shit, like everybody knows about that now, like thanks for a really nice secret, like so I feel like
I thought
maybe
I was the one who knew that.
Yeah, or it could be the blue weave, maybe that's why Moraine knows it. It's like a secret Ajah weave situation.
That's a good point. I forgot about Ajah weaves.
Yeah, they like to keep their own little siloed bit of knowledge, and it's just not one, or maybe it's simply one of the ones that's like just not taught generally because they don't think accepted are really deserving of knowing certain things because they could. Can you imagine what accepted Aes Sedai might do in the tower with all their hijinks if they knew how to make stuff invisible?
Or gateways?
Yeah, I feel like gateways is a truly lost weave. Otherwise, the adults, quote unquote, graduated Aes Sedai would be using it all the time. But yeah, I feel like invisibility is kind of we'll teach you this when you're older and more responsible. Potentially. I mean, I don't know. Because obviously Egwene doesn't know anything about it, and other Aes Sedai don't know about it.
I also feel like Moraine might have some of the more... there might be some weaves that she can do that she's like one of the few Aes Sedai who's actually powerful enough to do, and I feel like invisibility might be one of those.
Because Rand is very powerful, of course, so...
Yeah.
Assuming it's the similar kind of thing.
Of course, yeah. But it's just like an intricate weave.
Yeah. So, anyway, he kind of makes a joke by showing her that she's invisible.
I was going to say, the next thing I have is the 3 Aes Sedai walking in.
Yeah. And he's going to be quote-unquote respectable, but he won't.
Right, he won't. The 3 Aes Sedai we get are Nesune, who's a brown, and she's all about collecting specimens. Galena, who we know is, of course, the red-black.
Snake.
And, yeah, supposedly the leader, Koiren, who's the gray, the negotiator.
Correct. I thought it was really interesting that Egwene seems most concerned about Nesune, because I think we had a flashback in one of the last chapters where she thinks about the fact that Nesune taught Egwene in the tower. But is there anything else sitting behind that? Why is she so afraid of her?
Oh, that's actually referring to Galena.
Is it? Okay.
So, a plump, stately woman who will only be Koiren led the way, flanked by Nesune, and a raven-haired Aes Sedai in green silk. The raven-haired Aes Sedai in green silk is Galena. A pretty round-faced woman with a plum, dancing mouth. Egwene wished Aes Sedai wore the colors of the jaw, Whites did.
Yeah.
Because whatever that woman was, she would not believe her green, not with the hard stare she gave Rand from her first step into the room. Cold serenity, barely master contempt. That's all Galena.
No, I completely agree with that. I just thought there was another moment. Where Egwene kind of thinks, like, Nesune's the one to be concerned about as well. But I might have read that.
Well, that's where Nesune's gaze swept past without pausing. So Nesune sort of looks at her, but doesn't stop. Because we know later on we see Nesune sensed her.
Yes, that's true as well.
Right? Nesune could sense her ability to channel. So here we see Nesune, looks right at her, and because she senses someone has the ability to channel there.
Which, I mean, obviously, the decision to do this with Egwene was, a split-second thing, and they didn't have enough time anyway, but, I mean, why didn't they think about that?
Yeah, and it's actually, there's a line here where Rand starts looking at the women's faces to see if they have the ageless face. And, what was he? Of course, making sure none had the ageless face of an Aes Sedai, just checking the servants. Egwene shook her head and then froze again. He was a fool if you thought that enough. Most wore too much age. Not all old by any means, but you could put an age to them. Yet 2 were young enough to be Aes Sedai, not long raised. They were not. Egwene could only sense the ability in the 3 Aes Sedai, and she was close enough. So right there, she's close enough to them to sense their ability, which means they're close enough to her to sense her ability, and she doesn't even think about it.
She doesn't even think about it. Maybe she kind of thought that whatever Rand did to make her invisible would also have blocked. I mean, that's the only thing I
just don't think she even thought about it.
But I think you're right. I think that's the answer. She just didn't even think about it.
No, it just wasn't. It didn't even occur to them that, well, if you're invisible, because we see that with Perrin later when he's like, "Oh, just because someone's invisible doesn't mean I can't smell them."
Yeah, creepy, but yes.
And so a lot of both, with when he's hunting Slayer,
Yes.
And that's true. Like, people are like, oh, I'm invisible, therefore there's no way for anyone to sense me. But there are other senses: smell, touch, taste, and the ability to sense one channeling.
It's almost like the Aes Sedai blind spot equivalent of like a toddler covering their eyes and being like, no one can see me because I can't see you.
Totally.
Just like not
like
even, yeah, just like not even realizing, as you say, there are other ways of knowing that you're there. I mean, fortunately, later on they figure out how to, is it Nynaeve and Elaine and that group figure out the masking of the ability as well, which is much more useful.
Yes. Well, they learn that from Mogedion, because that's the only way that... Because they've already learned that, because Mogedion is currently hiding in Solidar, and they're using that weave on her to prevent her from being discovered.
Nynaeve thinks about that, but yes, Egwene's got too much going on right now to really think about it.
No, and I don't think she knows the weave. I don't think that's been passed on to her yet.
And then there's like the standoff where there's this moment where he knows that the three of them are channeling and calls him out on it. They don't believe him at all. We see that at the end, but they think it was just lucky.
Galena doesn't believe him, because again, Galena is...
True, actually.
So Nesune believes that he knows, right? Nesune's like, oh yeah, that's clearly, obviously, he was able to figure it out. And Galena is so good at being self-delusional that she's convinced herself there's no way that a man could figure out how to sense a woman channeling when the reverse has never been true. Like, it's the arrogance of the Aes Sedai that makes her think that there's no way he could be doing it. And that he must have been guessing. I
hate her so much, honestly.
Galena? She's awful.
Just more than even Elida. Like, she's just the worst. The worst. So much so that, like, I mean, obviously there's, like, books down the track where she ends up being dragged away by Thorava. And you're like, actually, I hate her more than Thorava, and Thorava is basically a rapist. You know what I mean? I'm just like, what does that say about me as a reader?
I mean, at least with Galena, Galena's evil, unlike Elida, who Elida's, like, well-intentioned and just terrible.
That's right. And in some ways, maybe she's there, like, I don't know if there's, like, an actual term for this, but, you know, she's there as, like, maybe, like, a Elida proxy, where you're like, well, she's red and black and evil. Mm-hmm. And at this point, as a first reader, you don't know that Elida's not black. You know what I mean? So it's like...
That's a good point, yeah.
Kind of like, it could increase that thought process around Elida as well. But yeah, anyway.
Don't we know from Alviarin that Elida's not black?
Yeah. I actually had a question in this, it's later in the scene, but around what we do and don't know about Alviarin at this point. I didn't get a chance to look it up yet. Do we know that Alviarin's black?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that we've seen from her POV. Like, she's black, definitely. Like, we've seen her meet with...
Right.
Shadowharan, I think.
Or Masana, maybe.
Or Masana, or something like that. Yeah, I don't remember. But we definitely know that she's black.
Sure. Yeah, okay. So that makes it even more obvious at the end of the scene, then.
Oh, yeah, when he's like, I think she's one of Alviarin's friends. It's like, you mean dark friend?
And then to the reader, it's like, oh, well, that means Galena's black.
Yeah,
if we didn't already know that, which I don't know that we do.
If we didn't already. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure we do.
Yeah.
I think this might be her, like, introduction.
I thought it was funny the way they phrase it when they're talking to Rand as, in all honor, as deserved.
Yes. That's a phrase that comes up a lot.
Corin says that, and she's just a grey, so, you know, she's not lying, but it's obviously she is down with the backup plan. Oh, and also, I just wanted to ask what you thought about this. So, there's 3 chests that are full of gold and riches, and I think it's ridiculous that they think they can just buy him. That's obviously was never going to work. Are these one of the chests that he ends up stuffed into? Or are there
Absolutely.
Others?
Yeah, this is... Like with the channeling, they are setting up for kidnapping him, right? So they want everyone to get used to them hauling big chests in and out of the throne room. Just like they want everyone to get used to them channeling nonstop in their palace.
And so it's one of these.
Yeah, absolutely. And we even see, especially here at the end, gosh, like the final... I'm going to read the final line of this chapter.
Ooh, yeah.
Nesune allowed herself a small sigh. Aside from pomposity, stating the obvious was Corin's only real fault. She did have a good mind when she used it, and they did have time. Her foot touched one of the specimen boxes again. However events spun out, the paper she intended to write on Althor would be the accumulation of her life. So she's literally talking about those treasure boxes as specimen boxes.
Yes, 100%. I noticed the same thing, and I was like, oh my god, specimen boxes? That's creepy as fuck, right? But also...
very creepy.
I don't think Nesune's a black. She's just, like, hella brown.
No, she's just a amoral brown.
Yeah.
She's, like, study to the nth degree.
Sorry, Aradia. I feel like I need to apologize every time an evil brown comes up. But yeah, and actually this goes a little bit to what I was alluding to before around Nesune's character. Ogier looked up in the What Wiki that Nesune has exceptional eidetic memory. She can cast a look on a page and read it aloud, remember conversations word by word that took place years ago. So it's that, like, you know, as dangerous...
That photographic memory thing.
Photographic memory, yeah.
Right.
Which sort of feeds into this, like, amoral pursuit of knowledge, as you say. So
she's
creepy.
like the Terminator, just very calculating and no real emotion, just very like facts go in, facts go out. You can't explain that.
Must be a great scientist, but you know, unethical. Yeah, and so he calls them out on the channeling. Yeah, she says Egwene. So Egwene hoped desperately that he would be careful. Nesune would not miss anything, and I feel like again that kind of goes to the. Yeah, she didn't miss anything. She knew you were there.
No. Yep. She did not miss the fact that you were there in the slightest.
Yeah.
You should have realized that. Not that it ends up being that big of a deal, but it does convince them that the Green is around. Moraine is still around. Or someone.
Someone. And it really ramps up the sort of stress of the scene as well. It makes it a lot more kind of dramatic as a reader, right? You're like, oh gosh, like anything could happen. I thought that too.
Now, here's a particular line I wanted to shout out.
Mm-hmm.
says, "We have, of course, heard of Moraine's unfortunate demise. I cannot offer myself, but Nesune or Galena would be most willing, basically, to be your advisor." "No," he said at last, sitting back with his arms on the arms of the chair. "It might not be safe. I would not like one of you to take a spear through your ribs by accident." The reason I bring up that line is because I think it's in like almost the next chapter or within the next couple of chapters. In Andor, the Saladar Aes Sedai takes a spear through the ribs, and that's what convinces them to confront Rand, which is what has him flee back to Cairhien, which is when he gets kidnapped. So an Aes Sedai taking a spear through the ribs is what's directly leads to him being kidnapped. And he talks about taking a spear through the ribs. And so I'm like, is that foreshadowing? Is perhaps Galena took that idea and used it against him and sort of like, that was what those Aiel that attack the Saladar Aes Sedai do, stick a spear through their ribs and say, stay away from him.
Yeah, I was about to ask who does that, because there's also the White Cloak attack, but that's arrows, so that's different.
Right, and that's a feign attack, by the way.
Yes, that is a feign attack for sure, with the dirty White Cloaks, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that attack is a Dark Friend attack. I think that's just, those are Dark Friend, those are men dressed as Aiel, they're not Aiel, they're men dressed as Aiel.
Sure.
If I remember correctly. And they...
And the one you're talking about happens a little later on.
Yeah, it's the stabbing, and I forget which Aes Sedai gets stabbed in the side, and she ends up surviving.
Yes.
But it's obviously a trap.
That's a really good pickup.
To piss them off.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about that.
So I'm wondering if maybe Galena heard that and was like, ooh, excellent idea.
Yeah, quite possibly. I just kind of read it as an excuse for them to go. That's like diplomatic, because he doesn't actually say no at any point. He's like, yeah, right. I might go to the tower. He says no to having an advisor. When they're talking about coming to the tower, he's like, yeah, maybe, when I'm ready to.
Right. The quicker I can see to certain things, the quicker I can go to the tower. I will send word when I can see you again. So he's definitely saying, he's stringing them along and being like, oh, I just have to finish up a few things. I'll be right there. 5 more minutes.
Yeah, hedging a little bit. I kind of just read that as diplomatic, but also hella condescending. And it kind of makes me think about them being gallantly sexist as well. Even if, and I really like that interpretation, if Galena maybe engineered that attack to happen, it's almost like, you're the women, so go and be safe, and I'll let the men deal with the dirty work. You know what I mean? Which is very Rand, obviously, with his list and
Oh,
everything
yeah,
else.
yeah. Well, I mean, the one thing, as much as I love Rand, he is a little bit of a misogynist. And struggles with it. That's the whole that is part of his internal struggle.
That's
whole
right.
series is he's struggling with his own internal misogyny.
That's right. That's, to be fair to him, it is something that is a big topic that we can talk about. Yeah. Well, okay, so Ogier sort of points out it's his cultural upbringing, not misogyny. I think that
But your cultural upbringing can be this misogyny, right? Like,
yeah. Perrin is the same, and so is Matt in his own way. Yep, absolutely.
yeah.
They're all...
I mean, just because you're brought up to be misogynistic doesn't mean you're not misogynistic.
Yeah, I think I know what he's getting at, though. Like, it's not a conscious thing. It's an internalized cultural practice.
Sure. But that's what misogyny is. It's an internalized cultural practice, like 100%.
And there are some people that will remain unnamed that leverage it instead of acknowledging it and struggling against it, I think is maybe the point. But yeah, so then what did I have next? Do you think that he was really intending to go to the tower, or is he just purely hedging them?
No, he's pure. Just the same thing he did with Gawyn, where he's like, "Yeah, I'll treat him nice and respect," when he's no intention of doing so. He's definitely being like, "Yeah, I'll be right there," while he's like going the other way. He knows Elida. He knows she's red. He's got zero intention of hanging out.
Because Egwene is concerned about that. Maybe it's just her not really giving him the, respecting his intelligence enough to understand that he knows the situation exactly. And because she thinks about the letter from Alviarin and how, he dismissed Elida's, but was kind of like seemed to be more like considering of Alviarin's and that he might have a friend. And she's like, no, like, don't be an idiot. But yeah, I don't think he was ever intending to do that. And then they get dismissed.
Yeah. When we do that little thing with Galena and Alvarin, which we talked about already.
That's a real Taviran moment, though, isn't it? And it's like,
definitely.
It's one of those things where she would have spoken before thinking and then immediately realised that she'd fucked up. She appeared startled to have spoken.
Yeah, that's whenever someone's startled to have spoken, that's Taviran twisting.
Absolutely. Just wanted to call that out. Then they go. So they were only there for like a matter of minutes, really. They're like, wave some gold under his nose, then veiled threats. He does the same thing.
Egwene's like, you can't really be thinking of going with them. And he's like, no. Like, he scoffs. He doesn't give her an answer, but he's just grins at her in amusement. Like, no.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I love this line here. Didn't I do what you wanted, what you told me to do, and what you wanted? And that's very distinctly saying you told me to do one thing, but you wanted me to do something else. And I called it, and I did exactly that.
Yeah.
Didn't I do what you wanted, which was put their backs up and be mean to them?
Yeah, exactly.
Bad enough that he knew, but throwing it in her face was just rude.
I mean, it is rude. It is rude.
A little bit, but her manipulation of him was rude. It was crude and it was rude. And he's like, and he played her. He was like, yeah, don't play me like that anymore. I'm not a farm boy.
Yeah.
Don't treat me like one anymore.
I know. And it just, again, it kind of goes to their like sibling rivalry style relationship, but with a lot more sort of defensiveness still embedded in there. And then he just kind of rides over her when she's like trying to still talk to him. And he's like, how about riding one of those big laundry baskets? I feel like they've done that before.
She's trying to convince him not to go to the White Tower, and he's like, there's no fucking way I'm going to the White Tower. He doesn't even, like, he totally agrees with her. He doesn't need her advice. She doesn't need to convince him not to go. Like, he agrees. He just doesn't want to be like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that would be, like, admitting that she was correct. Then they had a really, like, so they had this, like, kind of, was an argy-bargy sort of, like, kind of awkward moment about, like, she's just like, oh, he just wants rid of me now. That's nice. God, don't be such a dickhead. And then they have this really lovely moment about travelling. And it's a really cool discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really like that. And you get both their perspectives on how they're thinking about traveling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And she's just kind of like, wow, that doesn't make any sense at all. Yeah, he's saying that. And
this is the fish. You can't teach a fish to fly, and you can't teach a bird to swim. Mm-hmm. Although penguins might argue with you on that one. But yeah, because he's saying, like, the one power bores a hole in between the pattern, and she's saying, no, you alter the pattern to make it look like it's the same on both things. Mm-hmm. And for both of them, like, for him, altering the pattern seems like a terrible idea, and for her, boring through the pattern seems like a terrible idea.
Yeah, and it really like reflects the different methods of channeling the two sides of the one power. It just completely reflects that.
And I wanted to go a little bit in the difference between the male half of the one power boring a hole through the pattern versus the true power, which rips a hole in the pattern. No, I think of one as if you have if you've done some knitting, if you're gonna travel, you're like sticking a straw through your knitting and in the holes that are already there, or like putting a needle knitting through your weave.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the true power is more like taking a pair of scissors and cutting a slot in a piece of fabric.
Yeah, that true power traveling probably leaves damage. Then would be the implication, like whether it's
right that it actually cuts it.
Yeah, because it's the dark one's
Whereas
energy.
the boring of a hole, the boring of a hole, once you pull that straw out, the fabric just goes right back to the way it was with no permanent damage.
Mm-hmm. And then to just continue the analogy, the Saidar version of that would be you just like envision the exact same piece again on the other side instead.
Right.
Yeah, you kind of like will
that
it.
you just temporarily make the two peaches match, and
Yes.
then you just step from one to the other, and then
Yeah.
they don't match anymore.
Yeah.
And that's entirely reversible as well.
It's interesting because they have this discussion. She tries to convince him, are you sure there isn't any sense of making things the same? Or she's basically like, well, that's useless to me.
I wonder if she'd asked about skimming instead of traveling, if there would have been some similarity
Maybe.
there.
Maybe.
When he sort of, the gateway that he makes to that other place, the dark place that he skims through, I wonder if that would have been more of making things similar. But I'm guessing he does the same thing, where he burrows a hole through to that area, rather than creating a similarity.
Yeah, that may have made more sense to her specifically anyway. Because
Right, the skimming. Because
it's like Teleron Riyadh, right? That's the theory.
her method of traveling through the world of dreams feels very much like skimming to me.
Yeah.
That her skimming platform is Bella.
Yes. Yeah. So that's what I was going to kind of mention, I guess, was like, after this, she doesn't, like, travel, with a capital T, travel straight away, but she essentially skims in the world of dreams on a super fast Bella to Saladar. And so, like, when is the first time she actually travels? Does she kind of figure it out herself? I can't help but think that this conversation would still have been in some way important to her.
Important, yeah. I think she gets taught how to do it off screen because I think the girls learn it from Grendel. So she sort of forms her own method of traveling, and then when she gets around, not Grendel, sorry, Moghedien.
Yeah.
So when she gets to Saladar, she gets to quiz Moghedien, and with her already basic understanding of Teleron Riyadh traveling, the idea of forming a gateway to pure travel, I don't think it takes that much help. I think Moghedien is able to coach her through that. So once she gets to Saladar, she very, very quickly takes the skill she has and turns it into actual traveling from Moghedien.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, cool. And so then she kind of leaves him to it.
Yeah, and he's going nuts. He's like, I know you're there. Where are you hiding? Like, he's like ranting and raving at the voice in his head as she walks out. And she's like, well, the wheel weaves as the wheel wills, and walks away. It's like, oof, that's rough.
Yeah.
He's basically going insane in front of her, and she can't do anything about it.
And its weaving must be accepted. She thinks that too. Which is, a better way of thinking about it than when she started and being like, ew, what's going on? And then it kind of makes me think forward, skipping forward to when she's at the tower and they're having that big talk. And when she's Amrylin, all of these stepping stones in their relationship are so important for how she's actually able to manage him down the track.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like she sees him as a person.
They manage each other as well. He manages her in the same way.
Yeah, and then we have the Nesune's perspective as they're in the coach heading back to Aralin's palace.
Final switching back to the perspective of the Aes Sedai, and we sort of get a sense of what their plan is a little bit and how they felt about their interaction with Rand.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, a fascinating subject for study. Her foot touched one of the specimen boxes under the seat. She never went anywhere without proper specimen boxes.
Ugh, man, this is creepy. And then Galena being a fucking snake and just refusing to believe what's in front of her because it doesn't correlate with her belief system. And Gawyn is basically, just the mouthpiece figurehead, and it's pretty clear that she's not actually in charge. She's just, yeah.
If she can argue Rand into going with them voluntarily, she gets to stay in charge. And the odds of that happening are 0. And everybody knows it. And so Galena, they're all making the preparations to kidnap him. And that's basically why Galena's in charge, because she gets to take over once he's kidnapped.
Yeah, that was the agreement that they made. And I think it's funny that was a little thing here about insight into the way the Brown hierarchy works as well. This is from Nesune's point of view, this entire expedition irritated her. She would have been more than happy to join if asked, but Jessie Bilal had not asked. Jessie had practically shoved her on her horse physically. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. She was like, I would have chosen to go. I guess it's just meant to be a more of an insight into her strong, will and strong nature as a
Right. Do you think she's the head of the Brown? Is that it?
Jessie is.
She was able to get bundled on? Yeah, Jessie is. Okay.
Jessie is, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, we've already kind of touched on the spooky foreshadowing of the specimen boxes, which is just gross.
Yeah. And Galena saying he must have guessed. Any man who can channel would assume we would embrace Sidar. Even though everyone else is like, no, clearly he knew. Yeah, Galena being blind. And Nesune saying that there was somebody who could channel.
And how she's like contemptuous that the other two didn't notice. And I think it's just funny, again, it's just from her point of view, but the way she thinks that Gawyn's bombastic, I'm like, I don't really read Gawyn as bombastic person. I don't know, I just thought that was a
Yeah, I see her definitely. Maybe she's cowed later, and that's supposed to be like a change in personality.
Yeah, true.
She's supposed to start out bombastic and then goes to this sort of cowed secondary character, and that's the transition there. We never really get to see her as bombastic. We just see her described that way.
Yeah, that's true. What happens to Gawyn? Gawyn is held prisoner by the Ashaman, and she ends up as a Datsam in Path of Daggers. And
would assume that she ended up fighting in the Thakandar Valley during the last battle, but she's not actually in the last battle. She's basically after Dumai's Wells, and she's made that song. She's not really... That whole group of Aes Sedai is sort of... They exist, but they're not really important anymore. They're just the Aes Sedai who bow to Rand, and then he has his own pet Aes Sedai to do with what he wants in the last battle. Yeah, it's like they go one of three ways. Like, they either become stilled, or captured and compulsed by Varen, or it looks like some of them are also taken by the Wise Ones and not compelled. Yeah, she basically just becomes completely irrelevant after this. She makes the box thing happen through, really no fault of her own. She's working with Taviran, and then she just is irrelevant after that, so... Yep. No, and yeah, she becomes part of that group that swears fealty.
Oh, she does? Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it was reported by the Cerelia that she and the rest of the Aes Sedai prisoners have all sworn fealty to Rand. So there's those initial 6, and then I think there's like the rest of them are like, well, might as well just all do it.
Yeah, I mean, in the world of podcasting, anything can happen. So, glad you got it covered. I mean, you're a professional at this point. So.
Yeah. I pretty much, I mean, I am technically now a full-time podcaster, yes.
That's so cool.
It was a hefty push, but, I need to look around and acknowledge the fact that this is my full-time job, and has been now for 6 months.
Yeah, and it's like, achievement unlocked. You guys are talking about this way back. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it. Yeah, and I'm sad that Patrick leaving is kind of what allowed me to do it, but
Of course. The wheel weaves, Yeah, still I've got a puppy-shaped hole in my heart. I need to fill that eventually.
what's preventing you?
Finding a good breeder. Also, I am looking at shelters, but we have determined that for our lifestyle, for where we live, etc., we really need to get a small dog that won't be terribly demanding in terms of exercise and all this kind of stuff. Obviously,
Right.
whatever dog we get, you got to walk it and socialize it and do all this kind of stuff. But there's the difference between like a border collie, which you could easily get around here, and a shelters too, or like a Kelpie cross. You guys know Kelpies because they're like yeah, really high energy. My childhood dog was a Kelpie cross from the RSPCA here in Perth, and she was beautiful, but she was evidence of why you don't give dog training responsibilities to an 11-year-old. She was a bit nuts and out of control. Yeah. But she was a Kelpie cross, and so I kind of probably 90% of dogs in shelters in Perth are either Staffy cross or Kelpie cross, and so but I've got my eyes on that. On the other hand, obviously it's breeders, and it's a minefield, ethically speaking, and so I'm trying to do the right thing and get a little fluff ball from a place that I don't feel icky supporting the business model of. So yeah.
My neighbor across the way has a greyhound that she rescued from a racing ring. And greyhounds
really
are actually perfect apartment dogs because they are they just literally lay around. They're so inefficient. Like they're so good at being fast for 5 minutes. And then they're just dead the rest of the day. All they want to do is lay around and do nothing. So he's this like massive dog with all these weird proportions, and all he does is like he's just the laziest snuggler ever. He's the perfect apartment dog, even though he's huge.
A few of my friends have those. My partner's cousin has one as well, and he's just like, they call him Rocket, and he's just like this long boy who just sleeps. And I would love that personally, but yeah. We live in a democracy in our house, unfortunately, so I was outvoted. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's going to be a tiny dog is the current goal, at least. Pretty much since we moved out here to the burbs, we've wanted to do that. So go ahead.
One thing I found is don't hold anything too hard in your heart, because you find a dog and you fall in love with a dog, and you fall in love with the individual dog, not the breed.
Yeah, I know. This is a thing where I'm like, I could so go to shelters and I would just want to bring home all of them. So I'm putting it off. I'm just like, so you're totally right. And that's how breeders get you, like the backyard breeders, which is like what I mean when I say ethical minefield. Because they get you to come down and check it out, and then you fall in love with the dog, and you're like, well, I mean, I'm bonded now, like this is happening. Sister of a friend of mine basically had that, found out through a friend of a friend of theirs, got an Italian greyhound, and yeah, anyway, she told me the story afterwards, and she was like, yeah, so 6 months later we heard that they jacked up the prices, so put one and one together and you've got a puppy farm. Anyway,
my first dog before Timber was named Arrow, and sort of came from a similar situation, but like it was a friend of a friend, and I was just like, I'm not going to pay you for the dog. I said, I'll take the dog off your hands because you are breeding them badly and don't know what you're doing. And he thought he was going to have like 5 puppies and ended up having like 12 in the first litter, so he like didn't have buyers for them.
Oh wow.
And I was like, yeah, I'll take your dog, but I am not paying you for it. Like,
that's good.
This is, so my first dog, who ended up after a couple, probably 5 years, that was when I was living close to my parents. So when I moved to Portland, they fell in love with her and ended up taking her from me, which I'm still a little bitter about, but but she had a great life. She had a wonderful life with my parents, and they spoiled her until the day she died. But she was sweet. Yeah.
That's adorable. Was she like a pit mix sort of dog as well, or?
She was a bull mastiff.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a big old jowls, and she was actually the runt of the litter, which is why he couldn't get rid of her, because nobody wanted the runt. So she was only 90 pounds.
Oh wow, what does that translate to?
Divide by 2.2.
What does it make, like 60 or something? Yeah. Oh wow, that is little. Yeah. Wow. So the for that sort of dog.
40 kilograms. Yeah.
Yeah. So my childhood dog that I was talking about is she was always hovered around 20. She was, I mean, a smaller breed, but yeah, she was also the runt of their litter, and she was such a cutie. Just a little bit. One shrimp short of the barbecue, like we say. Can see how many of those Australianisms I can just like slip into this conversation.
Yeah, please do. See if you can just get as many in there as you can. If you can say Barbie instead of barbecue. Oh, okay.
Barbie.
What, Barbie or Bobby? Yeah, that's an American thing.
We just don't pronounce our R's. Like literally, like I just said.
Gotcha. Bobby.
Bobby.
So you're very Boston in that way.
I guess so.
Because the Bostonians don't pronounce their R's either.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of differences to the accent, but you share that at least.
Totes, yeah. And this is a tangent, but I have been loving on the History of English podcast. Oh my goodness.
Nice.
It's, I think AJ put me onto it, actually, from Discord here ages ago, and this dude just goes through this, like, brilliant, like, chronology of the English language. It's amazing, and I feel like I was saying to my water, like, I feel like I should have a certificate at the end of this, because he's just so good at explaining it all. And he does sort of on the Patreon as well, which you do when you support like a great podcast setup, and
which we appreciate.
Yeah, of course. And so he produces bonus content kind of looking at different topics, and so while the main podcast is a chronology, he dives into different topics and a little bit about the modern languages as well, which he will eventually get to. But yeah, like talks about how like it was the Cockney London that basically came to Australia and would have been the same in parts of the US when that colonialization, imperialism period was happening. Basically, our accent is descended from Cockney in London in a lot of ways. It's changed, but yeah, it's interesting.
That's cool.
Mm.
Am I wrong in thinking that the American accent is more similar to the English accent of like the 1700s, and the English accent has evolved since then? It became aristocratic in a way that it wasn't when America was colonized, and so that my understanding is Americans sound more like 1700s English than the English do.
I think so. Yeah. He talks a bit about that, or alludes to it, because he hasn't quite got there in the chronology yet. But the modern sort of south of England is like they call it received English, which is like the marbles in the mouth thing, which I can't really do because of my accent, and I'm sure you'd be the same. But I think, I don't know about this for sure, I feel like Irish had a huge influence too, particularly around the Boston region and that whole thing, and then it'll obviously spread from east to west, right, along the continent. So there was all of that going on, but I think you're right in general. Yeah,
and a lot of our Midwest is like Germanic, a lot of Germany folks. Yeah,
there's a lot of other influences too. I mean, obviously, and there was the French thing, and the War of Independence, and Central America most likely had a big influence, and like Spanish, and I've been watching a lot of that period of history videos on YouTube as well. I was saying this the other day, I come home from work and I don't really want to think about anything serious, but I'm also like open to learning stuff, so I just put on like history things on YouTube and just like let it like wash over my brain. It's nice.
See, I do that with science.
Yeah.
Like I'm big into astronomy and particle physics and all that kind of stuff is sort of my... I don't do history, although I have been listening to something called the British History Podcast.
Cool.
Lately.
Yeah, nice.
He's here in Portland, and so his stuff, his tweets got my attention because he was tweeting about local stuff in Portland, but in historical context. Yeah, his is definitely he writes it and then reads it type thing. You can tell that he's like carefully written every sentence. It's not a conversation.
Yeah.
It's definitely a pre-recorded history lesson.
Yeah, this other guy who I on the English podcast one is the same, and it's kind of interesting because it's pretty seamless when you listen to it. But then he does a couple where he's at a conference or something like that, and speaking much more naturally. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. The whole tone is different. The whole like, but it's like it fits it, and it's a vibe that he's gone for. And I feel like it's like a very history thing.
Totally. And I've thought about like, oh, could I do something like that? And nope.
Right. I mean, this is
I'm a
very
talker,
different
not a
style.
writer. Totally.
Yeah, it's a conversational style, and I think that's why people love it, honestly. So it's a different
But
thing.
I think Aradia gets a much more of a written type style for Broken Earth.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I think maybe being a solo one, it kind of lends itself to that anyway, because otherwise you probably just feel like you're talking to yourself. So, I get it.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or
Support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?